Hello everyone and welcome to the UKIP Christmas live stream. It's a pleasure to be here doing this. My name is Bill Etheridge. I'm a former UKIP MEP and now very happy to be back within the party working as the economic spokesman, and very kind of Neil to invite us back in. So let's get on with the show. I want to do the introductions first of all. We've got Garrie, a new contact, a new friend who I've met recently and followed some of his work. Adam's a radio host and been very active on social media for sure. And so, Adam, welcome to tonight's live stream, and I hope you enjoy yourself. Look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thank you, Bill. I'm looking forward to the adventure to come.
And our next guest is a man who we all know, but I'm going to just run through a little bit. Neil Hamilton, leader of UKIP, a man I've known for many years. Been fortunate enough to pick his brains and learn a few things off him over the years as well, and someone who I'm really delighted to be working with, a man who brings a wealth of experience and not least a modicum of humour and common sense to politics. So welcome onto the stream, Neil.
Very good to be with you. Excellent to see you again, Bill, and I'm delighted to have you back in UKIP.
Well, my pleasure, absolute pleasure. So let's set the ball rolling, as we've got a good few subjects to get through tonight. And as you can see, we're in the festive mood to start off with a selection of Christmas trees and Christmas spirit. But before we get on to that, let's talk about the big issues that I think people tuning in will want to talk about, and what UKIP live stream would be appropriate without, first of all, starting with Brexit. So let's start the ball rolling with Adam, and say the latest state of play with the negotiations, Adam. We've all been watching it, and it's pretty clear to see we're at the final point here, where either Boris blinks and gives ground, or he can stand up to them and go for a no deal. How do you think it's going? What's your take on where we're at?
I think that would be best answered if I, in the spirit of Panto, would assume the character of the ghost of Christmas yet to come. The year is 2035. There's a prime minister, let's say it's Sunak, who's still negotiating with Brussels. The health secretary, Lord Morgan, as in Piers Morgan, who will surely be ennobled after donating some of his large wages to the Conservative Party, will call for a lockdown because COVID-34, albeit less deadly than COVID-33, is still somewhat present in the Outer Hebrides, so the whole country needs to get locked down. And then you've got Captain Cheekbones of Brussels Town, or Sir Keir Starmer, as we know him, who's sort of skating around the issue in the true ice skating spirit of a white Christmas. And I just think that you can't trust people who have got it so wrong for so long. The only reason that the Tory party even adopted Brexit was to save the Tory party, not to save the country and not to help the country. You need people who can sail into the wind in government rather than people who just try to have the wind behind their back no matter which direction it comes from. And that's what the Conservatives have done with Brexit. I'm not expecting any Christmas miracles from Boris, and I don't think anyone should get their hopes up. We may have to fight this into the next general election. I think we might have to wait until then to get a proper Brexit.
Well, thank you for that nightmarish vision of Christmas future.
Very festive, Adam.
Yeah, the idea of Piers Morgan as health secretary actually said to shudder down my spine. But well, thank you for that. Now, as much as we're having a laugh about it, I do think Adam's got a strong point there. Neil, any sort of different takes on it, or where you think it's going to go?
Yeah, I mean, the EU does, of course, see itself as Hotel California you can check out, but you can never actually leave. And they have been playing a completely different game from the one which successive British governments have been playing, because their aim, of course, is to keep their dream of a United States of Europe going. And therefore, they can't risk Britain leaving and being a success outside the EU, because that would encourage others to follow our example, which is, of course, what Europe has done for centuries. And the French have never been able to forgive us for defeating them in 1815 and saving them in 1940. And so Monsieur Macron, who is now the president of France, he's certainly not a Macron. For me, he's a Micron. is playing the usual French game of hate the Brits. But over the weekend, Angela Merkel has been on the phone to Ursula von der Leyen, the German president of the EU Commission. And although Ursula, in her last phone call to Boris, had said, well, this is it, we're not going to offer you any more talks, still less any concessions, by the voice of sweet reason from Berlin, I am issuing an order to you, you will keep these negotiations going. And so lo and behold, Mrs. von der Leyen, who is the German defense minister, not the German attack minister, has extended the talks. And every time there's an extension of the talks, like Adam, my heart sinks, because I can't quite bring myself to believe that after all this, Boris would be foolish enough to risk political suicide by caving in on any of the key issues that are still in the ring. There's always a nagging doubt in my mind, because he wasn't a principled Brexiteer. For him, it was a toss-up which side of the referendum campaigning he was going to come down on. Last minute, he decided to go for Remain. He is a brilliant campaigner, much like Nigel Farage was, but he's a great people person, and he's a wordsmith of some renown, and people like him as a character, and he has reversed the political physics by winning the mayoralty of London as a Conservative. So he's clearly a man of parts, and I don't think he wants to go down in history as a Theresa May or a Neville Chamberlain or an Anthony Eden as a failure, which is what would certainly happen if you were to give way at the last minute and we were to get the worst possible deal that we could get out of the EU, which is no deal for them, because they want to keep us within their legal controls. And so they're saying, we've got to continue to tie up British business in EU red tape, and they've got to be able to continue to legislate for us on employment law, health and safety law, state aids, competition law, you name it. Everything's got to remain the same. We just leave in name only. Well, no British Prime Minister could, I think, survive signing up to any of that. So much as I have a lack of faith in Boris at the end of the day, I do think his sense of personal survival will probably overcome other obstacles. But I'm not banking on it. I mean, I've thought this before about other Tory leaders. I've seen Tory leaders come and go, all shouting the rhetoric that they thought would win the applause, but at the end of the day, caving in when the big battalions of the EU trained their guns on them. So we should presumably know in the next few days, although who knows, there may be yet an extended extension and then an extended extension beyond that. But I can't see how Boris could credibly keep this going more than a few days. We should know the answer one way or the other. Is he for us or is he against us? Is he a patriot or is he a traitor? The jury is currently out. We'll see.
Well, I think you touched upon quite a few things there, Neil. From my time out in Brussels, one of the things that occurs to me that no one really understands in our government or our media is that it's not about trade with the EU. Trade deals with the EU are not about trade. I sat in on some of the discussions about TTIP, where they were trying to do a deal with the United States. And the things that they were throwing over to the Americans were about diversity targets, carbon emission targets. Nothing to the conversation never even strayed onto trade. It was a minor aside about doing some business. And I think what Boris has done, in my opinion, because you spoke about him as an orator and as a good salesman, and he is undoubtedly, but he does what every Conservative does. If it's in vogue to be patriotic, he'll clothe himself in UKIP's clothes. If it's in vogue to be caring and lovey-dovey, he'll clothe himself in Tony Blair's clothes. Then whatever it takes to be successful. And I think he's setting up this big confrontation, this big battle that they're supposedly having, so that he can claim a few victories, maybe on fishing and things like that, but then sign over on the things that the EU actually really care about, which is keeping control over our social policies one way or the other. And I'm expecting a major sellout. So I genuinely hope that your more optimistic viewpoint comes through there. But I have a horrible feeling about this, that we're going to see an absolute classic Tory betrayal of the people. And then the Tory spin machine, they're counting on, by the time the next election, that they can portray themselves as Churchillian heroes who've achieved this wonderful deal, which, if you actually bother to read it, will probably be a massive sellout. But maybe I'm cynical. I hope I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure we'll be on their case. And if the Conservative Party thinks they can get away with a sellout, they're going to be very sorely mistaken on that one.
Yeah. Well, it'd be good news for UKIP if they do, in a sense, because it'd be very, very bad news for Britain. We haven't spent the last 4.5 years trying to implement the result of the referendum, only to see it snatched from us at the very last moment. So, I will declare general mobilisation the minute we know that it's a bad deal.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that should instill fear into the heart of the Conservatives, because we've shown in the past what we can do. And I don't see there's any reason at all, if they do betray the country in the way that perhaps they will, we couldn't do that again. And I saw a viewer's comment coming across the bottom about voting to leave the EU. Was it all a gimmick? Well, I believe that Boris Johnson would do whatever it took for Boris Johnson to be Prime Minister. We're all three of us here are confirmed Brexiteers. Did any one of us have to write 2 essays, one for each side, to decide which side we're going to support? I very much doubt it. Adam, you've got anything else to add to this section of the conversation before we move swiftly on in our time?
Well, just to address the question we saw, for the voters, of course, it wasn't a gimmick. For the voters, it's a feeling that was held deeply, that was laughed at, scoffed at, stamped upon for decades, 10, 20, 30, as some people waited from 1975 up to 2016. But I think for a lot of politicians, it was and remains a gimmick. That's the danger.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I have been fighting this battle for 53 years. I joined the Anti-Common Market League in 1967, 6 years before we actually joined the EU. And it was the second application that Britain made under Harold Wilson. I was 18 at the time. So I've never needed to write any essay to decide which side I'm on in this fight. It was instinctive right from the very start, indeed before the start. I have seen Conservative leaders come and go, and some of them have been explicit Euro cranks, obviously like Heath right at the very beginning, and those who have just waved the flag, like Cameron, on the other hand, who had no real beliefs of any kind, but was just a paid-up member of the global establishment and was their useful little pawn. And Conservative leaders over the years have been very good at talking the talk, but they would never actually walk the walk until we managed to force the referendum unwillingly upon them, and the people voted to leave. And we spent 4.5 years, amazing really, 4.5 years getting to where we are today, where we should have been right at the very beginning. So I mean, 2 parliaments have come and gone, and I was elected to the Welsh Parliament back in May 2016. The following month we had the referendum. We're coming to the end of our 5th term of Parliament in Wales, and we still haven't left the EU. So when I started off by saying it's Hotel California, we haven't checked out, and it's the British establishment in line with the European establishment, which is all part of a global establishment, which of course Trump has disrupted, but we're going back now to normal service in the United States under Joe Biden. Then we have to fight the most ferocious battle on the part of the people to dislodge our rulers from their belief that they're a privileged caste who have an innate right to rule forever, and the people's vote doesn't count. So that is what we're fighting for here.
Excellent. We can all concur with that. Moving along in our time that we've got, other big issue, in fact, in some ways, some might argue even overshadowing Brexit, COVID-19, lockdowns, tiers, regulations. We've just seen today that London is being thrown into tier 3, which many of us in the rest of the country can confirm to our friends in London means complete economic catastrophe for you. And, you know, it's the kind of thing that certainly the hospitality sector just isn't going to recover from in any kind of numbers. Personally, it's been one of the reasons why I was very keen to come back into politics, was to fight against this, because I do believe that with an illness which has got a recovery rate 99.5% or something along those lines, to be sacrificing our economic future and giving away freedoms that have taken centuries by our ancestors to fight for to achieve is a ludicrous overreaction. Ludicrous. We'll reverse the order on this one and come directly to Neil, because I've seen you're just having a crisp or something there, so I thought I'd catch you with your mouthful, Neil, and if you want to lead off on this one.
It's a Japanese rice cracker, actually. It's not. It's anything but European, anyway. That's my decision for Christmas. Is we're buying everything from outside the EU, apart from Britain itself. So yeah, well, I've spoken and voted against these COVID regulations every single time that they've been presented to us in the Welsh Parliament, because I believe that this whole exercise has been a massively disproportionate reaction on the part of governments almost everywhere in the world. And as you rightly say, Bill, I mean, this is a disease which has a 99.9% recovery rate, actually. And we know that for those who've got underlying conditions like diabetes or obesity, or just extreme old age, then it's difficult to recover from if you get it. Not impossible, but if you look at the mortality figures, we know that 75% of the deaths are people aged over the age of 75. So it's something which can't really affect young people, anybody of working age, adversely, unless they've got something else very wrong with them underneath it. And what we should have been doing right from the start is identifying those who are most vulnerable and having a policy that's tailor-made to protect them, whilst we were gearing up the health service to cope with the projected number of intensive care places that we needed, and to deal with the complications of other conditions. That was never successfully done. We had all these Nightingale hospitals, which were never used. And the health service has actually survived without any great difficulty, except that we've now got a massive queue of people with other serious conditions, which who are going to die from them, or they're going to suffer months, maybe years of pain and discomfort, because we've got a national COVID service now rather than a national health service. And the government still hasn't learned the lessons of this, least of all in Wales, where we were the first to ban sales of alcohol in pubs, which is the same as sort of banning sales of meat in butchers. And this is the ludicrousness of the situation. And how many people are going to spread coronavirus by having a glass of wine with their lunch? And the whole thing is a complete rational disconnect. And the whole purpose of this unprecedented restriction of freedom in this country in peacetime, and actually in many ways it's been even more restrictive than the regulations that were introduced in the war. We never had a ban on the sale of alcohol in pubs during the war. We've got one now, and it's amazing, I think, that we haven't got unrest spilling out into the streets in a meaningful way to protest about all this. One of the things which I find most depressing is how the British people continue to swallow the prognostications of the so-called experts, whose predictions have been comprehensively exploded on many occasions since the first lockdown in March. You know, the ludicrous projections of 500,000 deaths by the sainted Professor Ferguson, who had to leave his post because he was found with his trousers down during the crisis, and recently Dr. Doom and Dr. Gloom, who appear each side of Boris at the lectern, where they said that we would be moving into a major pandemic where we would have sort of 4,000 deaths a day, or whatever the figure was, only a few weeks ago, none of which ever happened. And I mean, I have a meeting with one of my health boards every single week, which covers 3 counties in southwest Wales, Cardiganshire, Ceredigion as it's now called, Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire. And they've got 149 people in hospital at the moment with COVID-related conditions, and they've got 7 people in intensive care. And this is an area which covers many hundreds of thousands of people. If we can't have a health service which costs us 1/6 of our gross national product, which is able to cope with numbers of that kind comfortably, then something is wrong with the system, isn't it? And all right, that's a relatively rural area, and in towns and cities like Cardiff and Swansea, it's not quite so comfortable. But nevertheless, we should be able to cope with a virus of this kind without any great difficulty, without trashing the entire economy and without imprisoning the whole country in their homes or in a kind of open prison, which is what has happened to us. So I continue to be skeptical about any of this. Now, apparently, today's news is that we've got a variant of the virus. So that will be the continuing excuse to keep it going, of course. And then we'll have a variant on the variant, no doubt, in due course. But the policy response will still be the same. You know, we've got to lock people up for their own good.
I firmly don't. I honestly believe this is nothing to do with the virus. The measures that are being taken. I personally think I was thinking, how could I take over a country? First thing I'd do is frighten people. Second thing is I'd hit them with lots and lots of propaganda saying if you don't do what you're told, you're probably going to die or kill your granny. And the next thing I'd do is I would say, if you get together in groups, you're all going to die as well. So you can't meet in the pub to organise your protests. And then as soon as you've got that, then all you're left with is things like this social media, which there's legislation being talked about on social media comments as well. So, you know, my own personal view is I think there's something a lot darker behind this. I simply can't believe, if you look at the figures for the deaths, that it is just about coronavirus. I simply don't believe that. Adam, your thoughts?
Well, I think if this proves anything, it proves that anything government touches will absolutely turn to rot. It's the opposite of the Midas touch. And it's a perfect example of why we need a small government, a government that is self-restrained, a government that understands that fundamentally and constitutionally, government only has a few limited roles. You've got to protect the realm, ensure the internal peace, run a court system that ensures that fraud and deception and criminality is punished. And apart from that, there's really only a few other minor things that government should do. If government didn't have the power to do this, and I have no doubt that a lot of people who go into government would want to do this, but if they had this restraint, if they understood history and how Britain dealt with past pandemics that were exponentially worse than this in terms of morbidity and mortality, they wouldn't have done this. They're absolutely drunk on power, and yet they're incredibly incompetent. Matt Hancock is the kind of person who would bring an umbrella into a submarine. It's stupid people with too much power. Limited government is the key, because even if the stupid ones slip through, they won't be able to ruin your lives.
Yeah, amen to that. Amen to that. Now it's moving on to the next section. It's that time of year where we look back on 2020 and make thoughts, promises, resolutions for 2021. So, reversing the order again, Adam, could you possibly point out maybe one or two, briefly, because the time is running on a bit, briefly, a couple of things from 2020 you want to make comments on, and then a resolution or a political promise or a personal one, whatever you think, for 2021?
I hope that in this year 2020, people have learned to trust themselves a bit more and trust the people who want to control your lives a bit less. The tax is too high. The freedom is too low. First, you couldn't smoke in a pub. Now you can't drink in a pub. Soon there won't be pubs at all. Trust yourself. Trust your neighbor. Trust small business. Get off of our backs. That's the slogan for 2020. And I think the resolution for 2021 is someone who never trusted Labour, I'll never again trust a Conservative politician. There are a few exceptions of backbenchers who are decent people, but as a party, they can't be trusted. And Labour have lost all credibility a long time coming.
Agreed. I'll take my turn before we can wrap up with the leader. I think my high point, or most important point of 2020 has again been to do with the government overreach on COVID. The fact that we are seeing our entire economy devastated, and then we have this talk of this Green New Deal, which is code word for communism, is code word for destroying people's freedoms, liberties, and mass unemployment, because this kind of change doesn't happen overnight. And I think it's the most sinister, darkest, most unpleasant year that I've been unfortunate enough to witness. And my resolution for 2021 is a simple one. Whatever it takes, however it can be done, I'll be battling for freedom for the individual and for our country to avoid these absurd and undemocratic changes that are being forced upon us under the guise of protecting us and stopping the planet setting on fire tomorrow. Absolutely, we must stand against it, and I will do whatever I can to do that. Now, as we come to the end, the grand finale, Neil, your thoughts on 2020 and your resolutions for 21?
Yeah, well, I agree with all that you've both said. And for me, I mean, the principal realization of how things have played out over COVID, as indeed over the EU, is how the media and the global establishment in business and in technology have all been as one with the government. One thing we haven't mentioned yet is the tech-tators, the Zuckerbergs and the Dorseys and others, who are now applying a censorship in their own organizations to try and close down people who have skeptical views on COVID, or indeed anything which confronts their globalist agenda. And so we've gone on beyond governments having the power to control people, to people who are even more unaccountable even than the EU. They control businesses which are of vast size. I mean, the principal beneficiary of COVID, of course, is Mr. Jeff Bezos, whose wealth has been increased in the last 9 months, apparently by $70 billion, and is now the richest man in the world by a country mile, because small businesses and independent businesses have had to close down, and everybody's ordering everything on Amazon. And similarly, social media and other internet-based platforms and ways of doing business have been boosted by this as well. And so we've created these massive global corporations that now have immense power in their own hands, and even institutions like the EU are finding it very difficult to control them, which in normal circumstances I'd be delighted to see, except that I think that these tech-tators are just as bad, if not worse, than political dictators, because they're more difficult to get at, more difficult to control, and they have the means to peer into our lives by using technology in a way of which secret services perhaps can only dream. So that's all part of the nightmare scenario that Adam was postulating right at the very start of this talk this evening. But that, I think, is one of the principal aims that we should have in the forefront of our mind in 2021, is not only on how to control governments trying to control us, but also how we can free ourselves from the control of unaccountable tech-tators too. So I think it's going to be an important year for us who believe in freedom, and we must redouble our efforts to try to persuade people that the infantilization of the debate on so many issues. Bill mentioned global warming. That's exactly the same as the debate over COVID, the corruption of science, the blatant misrepresentation of statistics in order to achieve a political objective, the impoverishment of the people, which is inherent in both of these campaigns by the global establishment, is something from which the people have to free themselves. And I suppose that's the principal realization that we have out of all this. I remember 30 years ago, there was a historian called Francis Fukuyama who wrote a book called The End of History, that after the Cold War, there wasn't going to be any more ideology. Well, there is, in one sense, no more ideology, but it's the ideology of the powerful to keep themselves in power which can mutate just like a virus can, in order to keep them in control. And so the battle for freedom always has to be fought and always has to be won. And the battle is never finally won. We've seen this over the EU as well. It's never finally won until it's won. So that's the reason why UKIP must keep on going. That's why we must all keep on going, to fight these eternal battles.
Well said, sir. As it's our Christmas broadcast, quick final sentence from each of us. Adam, what are you going to be doing over Christmas? And if you've got a Christmas message for everyone, just a quick sentence to end the broadcast on a cheerful note.
I'm going to try to have as cheerful a Christmas as possible, even though it's probably going to be a bit unusual. But there's certain things that people don't want taken away from them. Christmas is one of them. It's been there before the Tories. It's been there before Labour, been there before the Liberals. It will be there after. Keep the faith. Vote for a party like UKIP, because this party wants you to have a better life and a normal life. So be cheerful. It can't get any worse. It can only get better.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. And for me, Christmas is the most important time of the year. I think in a country, traditional Christian country like ours, the traditions that come with Christmas, everything about it, family, friends, getting together is vital. And I'm very proud to be in the only party, it seems to think that Christmas matters, because all the rest want to ban it. So I say I will be enjoying Christmas absolutely as I always would. I will be full of festive cheer as much as possible. Even if the pubs aren't open, I'll find a way. And I think it's going to be it's our duty to enjoy ourselves and have a great time. So I'm going to go for that, and I'm going to really enjoy my Christmas as much as possible as an act of revolutionary defiance. I'm going to get drunk and have fun and eat turkey. Neil, your thoughts on Christmas?
Well, we're going to have an invasion of family from all over the place, within the law, within the rules. So we'll have a house full here, and we'll have a pretty riotous time, especially with 3 tiny children who will keep us entertained and busy. So I'm looking forward to Christmas for all the usual reasons. And there'll be a lot of raising of glasses and enjoying the good things of life whilst we may. One of the things about lockdown that I've discovered at our age anyway, and having plenty of space in which to live, that it hasn't been too difficult to do without most of the human race. So I look on the bright side. The shortest day is coming in just over a week's time, and then the days will start to lengthen again. We look forward to spring and the summer, and let's hope that it'll be a new dawn for Britain in 2021, really outside the EU, and then we can use the freedoms that we have fought for so valiantly and at such cost over the last 4.5 years to see a rebirth of our country, so that we can give full vent to the creativity of our people, and we can recreate the links with the former empire, now the Commonwealth, across the Atlantic with the United States. It's a great tragedy that President Trump isn't going to be there to welcome us beyond 21st of January or whatever. We could have made real progress, I think, in Anglo-American relations under Trump. I'm not so sanguine under Joe Biden, who's still fighting the Irish Civil War, as far as I can see. But nevertheless, America is our greatest ally, and to all intents and purposes, our eternal ally. We're Anglophone countries, share common law heritage, and as with the other Commonwealth countries, the aberration of the last 50 years, membership of the EU will be firmly behind us, and we can go forward together with our united strength to create peace and prosperity for all.
And on that optimistic note, it's time for me to say to everyone from UKIP, from myself, Bill Etheridge, Adam Garrie and Neil Hamilton, we wish you a very Merry Christmas. Enjoy yourselves. Don't let anyone stop you having fun. And then the new year, 2021, let's hope it's going to be much better than this, and we can look forward to a bright future. But for now, from all of us, good night and Merry Christmas.
Good night, all.
Good night.